The Iowa sun beat down merciless on the dusty Main Street as Claire Delaney stood outside the general store, counting the coins in her palm one last time. $27.32. Every penny she'd gotten for her mother's Singer sewing machine. The only thing of value left in the house after the funeral. "That all you got for it, Mrs.?" Hartley called from her porch across the way, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for those she deemed beneath her station. "Your mama's machine was worth twice that." Claire didn't look up. She'd learned long ago that engaging with the townswomen only gave them more ammunition. Instead, she folded the money carefully into her worn leather purse and turned toward the train depot. "Where you think you're going, Claire?" This time, it was Martha Brennan, emerging from the millinery shop with her perfect little bonnet perched just so on her perfect little head. "Finally given up on finding a husband here?" The laughter that followed stung worse than any slap. Claire kept walking, her long stride eating up the distance to the depot. Behind her, she could hear them gathering like crows. Can't blame her for running. No man in his right mind would court a woman who could wrestle a bull. "My Henry says she's taller than most men in town. What kind of man wants to look up at his wife?" "Built like a plow horse, that one. All shoulders and no grace." Claire's jaw tightened, but her pace never faltered. She'd heard it all before. Every Sunday after church, every social gathering, every time she'd dared to attend a dance only to stand against the wall watching smaller, daintier girls get swept onto the floor. The train depot loomed ahead, its red brick facade promising escape. Inside, the ticketmaster barely glanced up from his ledger. "One way to Marrow Pass," Claire said, sliding her money across the counter. Now he looked up, squinting through wire-rimmed spectacles. "Marrow Pass? That's clear out in the territories? Miss, nothing there but dust and cowboys." "That's fine." He shrugged, counting out her fare. "Train leaves in an hour. You got luggage?" "Just this." She hefted her single carpet bag, everything she owned compressed into its fraying depths. Outside on the platform, Claire found a bench in the shade and sat down to wait. The dress she wore, her best one, deep blue cotton with small white buttons, already showed sweat stains under the arms. She'd made it herself, adding extra length to the hem and sleeves. But even so, her wrists showed more than was considered proper. "Claire Delaney, what in heaven's name are you doing?" She looked up to find Pastor Williams approaching, his black coat dusty from his walk. Of all the people in town, he'd been the kindest, though even his kindness had limits. "I'm leaving, Pastor." "But where will you go, a woman alone?" "I have employment waiting, a position as cook at a way station." His face creased with concern. "But you have no family there, no connections. Wouldn't it be wiser to stay where you're known?" Where she was known? Yes, that was the problem. Known as the spinster who'd never marry. Known as the woman too large, too plain, too much of everything that wasn't delicate or desirable. Known as the disappointment who'd nursed her ailing mother for 5 years while her prettier cousins found husbands and started families. "I appreciate your concern," Claire said carefully. "But my mind is made up." The pastor sighed, reaching into his pocket. "Then, at least take this for emergencies." He pressed a small cloth bundle into her hand. Inside, she could feel the weight of coins. "I can't." "You can and you will. Consider it a going-away gift from the congregation." They both knew the congregation would have fits if they knew he'd given church money to the likes of her. But Claire didn't argue. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The train whistle shrieked in the distance, and soon the great iron beast came churning into view, belching black smoke into the clear Iowa sky. Claire stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'll pray for you," Pastor Williams said. "Thank you." As she climbed aboard, clutching her single bag, she heard someone shout from the platform, "Look at her, having to duck to get through the door." More laughter, always laughter. Claire found a seat near the back of the car and settled in. her knees pressed uncomfortably against the seat in front. The train lurched forward with a grinding of gears and a fresh blast from the whistle. Through the window, she watched the town that had never wanted her slide away. The church steeple, the schoolhouse where she'd towered over the other children, the cemetery where her mother lay. Good riddance. The conductor came through, checking tickets. He was a small, wiry man who had to look up to meet her eyes. Marrow Pass. A long journey. Miss, you meeting family there? Starting work. Ah! He punched her ticket and moved on, uninterested in further conversation. The hours rolled by with the rhythm of the rails. Claire watched the landscape change. Green fields giving way to endless grass, then to scrubland dotted with low hills. Other passengers came and went at various stops. Most of them men headed west for opportunity or escape. She kept her eyes on the window, avoiding their curious glances. Night fell somewhere in Kansas. Claire dozed fitfully, her head knocking against the window with each sway of the car. She dreamed of her mother's last days. How small she'd looked in the bed they'd shared. How her final words had been an apology. I'm sorry. Claire, sorry I couldn't make you smaller, prettier, more like what the world wants. Don't say that, Mama. Should have married you off young, before you got so tall. Should have. Claire had pressed a finger to her mother's lips. Hush now. Rest. But the apology haunted her still. Dawn found them deep in the territories. The landscape had turned harsh and beautiful, all red rock and distant mesas. Claire pressed her face to the glass, watching this new world reveal itself. Here, maybe, she could be something other than the town spinster. Here, maybe, her size might be an asset rather than a curse. Marrow Pass, next stop, the conductor called. Claire's stomach tightened. She'd been so focused on leaving, she'd barely thought about arriving. What if the position had been filled? What if they took one look at her and sent her back? She had enough money for a return ticket, barely, but nowhere to return to. The train began to slow. Through the window, Claire could see the town, if it could be called that, a single main street, buildings of raw lumber and false fronts, horses tied to hitching posts, and dust. So much dust it seemed to hang in the air like fog. The platform, such as it was, consisted of wooden planks laid beside the tracks. As the train wheezed to a stop, Claire gathered her courage and her bag. This was it, no turning back. She descended the steps carefully, mindful of her skirts. The moment her feet hit the platform, she felt the eyes, men lounging outside what was clearly a saloon, women peering from behind curtained windows, children stopping their play to stare. A wolf whistle cut through the air. Well, well, look what the train brought in. Claire didn't turn toward the voice. She'd learned that acknowledgement only encouraged them. That's a lot of woman, another voice added, followed by coarse laughter. Head high, Claire walked toward what appeared to be the main building, a 2-story structure with Marrow Pass Way Station, painted in fading letters across the front. Her letter of employment had said to ask for Mr. Josiah Briggs. The interior was dim after the blazing sun, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. A long bar ran along one wall, tables scattered throughout, stairs leading to what she assumed were guest rooms above. Behind the bar stood a man with impressive mutton chops and a stained apron. Mr. Briggs. He turned, looked her up and down, and scowled. You're the cook. Claire Delaney. You sent... I know what I sent. Just didn't expect... He gestured vaguely at all of her. Is there a problem? Can you cook? Yes, sir. My references. Don't care about references. Can you handle a kitchen that feeds 40 men a day? Sometimes more. I can... He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Kitchen's through there. You'll sleep in the room off the back. Pays what I promised, minus board. Start tomorrow morning, 4 o'clock sharp. Today you get settled. Relief flooded through her. Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Don't thank me yet. This ain't Iowa. Miss, men here are rough. Work is hard. And nobody's gonna treat you gentle just 'cause you're a woman. Still want the job. Claire thought of the train ticket in her pocket, the way back to a place that had never wanted her. I want the job. Then welcome to Marrow Pass. Try not to die. As she made her way to the kitchen and her new quarters, Claire could still hear the whispers following her, but for the first time in her life, she didn't care. She was 1,000 miles from Iowa, from the weight of being known and found wanting. Here, she was nobody, and nobody was exactly who she wanted to be. The kitchen of the Marrow Pass way station became Claire's domain, and she ruled it with an iron skillet and a determination born of necessity. 2 weeks had passed since she'd stepped off that train, and already she'd established a routine that kept her busy from before dawn until well after dark. At 4 in the morning, while the world still slept under a blanket of stars, Claire would light the massive cast-iron stove and begin the day's bread. By 5, she had coffee brewing strong enough to float a horseshoe, as the Cowboys preferred it. By 6, when the first bleary-eyed travelers and ranch hands stumbled in, she had platters of biscuits, bacon, and beans ready to serve. "More coffee here," someone would shout, and Claire would navigate the crowded room with a heavy pot, refilling cups without comment. She'd learned quickly that invisibility was her best defense. Do the work, keep quiet, don't meet anyone's eyes for too long. But they watched her anyway. Never seen a woman work a kitchen like that, she heard Jake Morton tell his companion one morning. Like watching a man, 'cept for the skirts. Ain't natural, the other replied. Woman that size ought to be, I don't know, something else. Claire pretended not to hear, focusing on flipping flapjacks with practiced precision. Let them talk. As long as they ate her food and left her be, she didn't care what they thought. The work was harder than anything she'd done in Iowa. The heat from the stove and the already blazing territorial sun left her drenched in sweat by noon. Her hands, already rough from years of farm work, developed new calluses from handling heavy pots and cast-iron skillets. But there was a satisfaction in feeding hungry men who appreciated good food even if they didn't appreciate the woman who made it. "Best damn stew I've had since St. Louis," declared a traveling merchant, wiping his bowl clean with a chunk of bread. Mr. Briggs, counting money behind the bar, nodded with satisfaction. Claire knows her way around a kitchen. It was the closest thing to praise she'd gotten from him, and she tucked it away like a treasure. The other women in town were less accepting. Marrow Pass boasted exactly 7 respectable women wives of shopkeepers and ranchers who lived in the better houses on the north side of town. They came to the way station occasionally, usually in groups, and their whispered conversations always seemed to swirl around Claire like dust devils. "Did you see her serving breakfast this morning, bold as brass, like she belongs here?" "Poor thing. Doesn't she realize how she looks?" "Maybe where she comes from. Women like that can find work decent places." Claire learned their names but kept her distance. Mrs. Adelaide Hutchins, the banker's wife, seemed to be their unofficial leader. Mrs. Dorothy Price ran the dry goods store with her husband. The others blurred together in a mass of disapproving faces and whispered judgments. Then there were the other women, the ones who worked in the saloon next door, whose laughter rang out at all hours of the night. They were friendlier, nodding to Claire when they passed on the street, but she knew better than to acknowledge them too warmly. Her position was precarious enough without associating with those kinds of women. It was on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after her arrival, that Claire first noticed him properly. The lunch rush had ended, and she was out back dumping wash water when she heard horses approaching. Cowboys were always coming and going, changing horses at the livery, stopping for meals or supplies. She paid them no mind anymore. But something made her look up. 3 men were dismounting at the hitching post. 2 she recognized as regular hands from the Maxwell spread. The third was a stranger, or rather, not quite a stranger. She'd seen him before. She realized, always at the edge of her vision, always quiet. He was tall, not as tall as her, but close enough that she wouldn't have to crane her neck to look at him. Sun-weathered face, dark hair that needed cutting, clothes that had seen better days but were clean. What struck her most were his eyes, gray like storm clouds, steady and watchful. As she stood there with her empty bucket, those eyes found hers across the dusty yard. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked at her like he was reading something written in a language he was still learning. "Sawyer," one of his companions called. "You coming in or not?" He held her gaze a moment longer, then turned and followed the others inside. Sawyer. At least now she had a name to go with the face. Claire returned to her kitchen, trying to shake off the strange feeling that look had given her. Men looked at her all the time with curiosity, disgust, amusement, occasionally with the kind of interest that had nothing to do with her personally and everything to do with their own base needs. But this had been different. There'd been no judgment in those gray eyes, no amusement or revision, just observation. She was ladling stew into bowls when the three men took their table. The other two, Bill and Tom, she remembered now, were engaged in a heated debate about horse breeding. Sawyer sat quietly, his attention seemingly focused on the meal before him. Claire served them without comment, noting how Sawyer's hands, calloused and scarred from rope work, handled his spoon with unexpected delicacy. When she came to refill their coffee, he looked up at her again. "Soup's good," he said. 2 words, that was all. But something in the way he said them, matter of fact, without flattery or condescension, made her pause. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once and returned to his meal. Bill noticed the exchange and grinned. "Sawyer don't say much, but when he does, he means it. Best tracker in 3 counties. 2, can find a needle in a haystack. This one can—" "If the needle wants to be found," Sawyer said quietly, and his companions laughed like he'd made a great joke. They finished their meal and left, spurs jangling. Claire watched through the kitchen window as they mounted up. Just before he rode off, Sawyer glanced back at the station. She stepped away from the window quickly, heart beating faster than it should. "Fool," she muttered to herself, attacking a stubborn pot with more force than necessary. "You're a fool, Claire Delaney." But over the following weeks, she found herself watching for him. He came in every few days, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, always sat at the same table in the corner, always ordered the soup or stew, always said those same 2 words, "Soup's good," or sometimes, "Stew's good." She began to look forward to those simple pronouncements more than she cared to admit. The other men noticed. Of course, men always noticed when a woman paid attention to one of their own, even if that attention was nothing more than an extra ladle of stew or a coffee refill that came a little quicker. "Sawyer's got himself an admirer," Jake Morton announced one evening, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Big Claire's sweet on him." Laughter erupted. Claire felt her face burn, but kept her expression neutral as she cleared tables. "Leave her be," Sawyer said quietly. The laughter died. Jake's face reddened. "Just having some fun. Sawyer, no harm meant." "Then have it elsewhere." There was something dangerous in his quiet tone, and Jake apparently heard it too. He muttered something under his breath and turned back to his drink. Claire escaped to the kitchen, hands shaking. She shouldn't be grateful. She should be mortified that she needed defending at all. But she was grateful, deeply so, for that quiet intervention. When she ventured out later to collect empty plates, Sawyer was gone, but on his table, tucked under his coffee cup, was a silver dollar, twice the usual payment for a meal. She picked it up, felt its weight in her palm. Such a small gesture, but it felt like acknowledgement, recognition, something she couldn't quite name. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed behind the kitchen, Claire allowed herself to think about gray eyes and quiet words, about a man who didn't look at her like she was a curiosity or a joke or something to be pitied. It was foolish. She was 7 years past the age when girls started dreaming of marriage, and nothing about her had gotten more appealing with time. But in the dark, with no one to see or judge, she could admit that when Sawyer Hale said, "Soup's good," it felt like he was saying something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like, "You're good." And for a woman who'd been told her whole life that she wasn't, those 2 words were worth more than all the silver dollars in the territory. The saloon next door to the way station never slept. Even now, at barely 9 in the evening, Claire could hear the tinny piano and raucous laughter through the thin walls of her room. She sat on her narrow bed, mending a torn apron by lamplight, trying to ignore the voices that drifted through like smoke. "I'll bet $5 she dies an old maid," someone was saying. "Big Claire ain't never gonna find a man desperate enough." "I'll take that bet," another voice chimed in. "Give her 10 years. She'll be so lonely she'll take up with anyone who'll have her, even Toothless Pete." More laughter. Claire's needle slipped, pricking her finger. She sucked at the drop of blood, tasting copper and bitterness. 3 months in Marrow Pass had taught her that the walls between the station and the saloon were thin as paper when it came to gossip. The men who drank there seemed to find endless entertainment in speculating about her future or lack thereof. "Hell, she'll die with her hands in dishwater and her bed empty," the first voice continued. "Mark my words, some folks are just meant to be alone." Claire set aside her mending and blew out the lamp. In the darkness, those words echoed louder than the piano. Meant to be alone. Was that her fate to spend her remaining years cooking for strangers, washing their dishes, collecting their coins, until one day she simply stopped? She thought of her mother, dying in that narrow bed in Iowa, apologizing for Claire's very existence. Thought of the aunts who'd suggested she might find purpose in caring for other people's children since she'd never have her own. Thought of every dance where she'd stood against the wall, too tall, too broad, too much. Some folks are just meant to be alone. Maybe they were right. The next morning brought February's first real storm. Claire woke to howling wind and the sound of snow hitting her window like a handful of tiny stones. By the time she had the stove lit and coffee brewing, the world outside had disappeared into a wall of white. "Gonna be a quiet day, mister," Briggs said, peering out the front window. "Nobody fool enough to travel in this." He was wrong. By noon, travelers started straggling in, men who'd been caught on the road, seeking shelter from the storm. The dining room filled with the smell of wet wool and leather, melting snow creating puddles on the plank floor. Claire worked without pause, serving hot coffee and bowls of stew to men grateful for warmth and food. The storm had made everyone equal rancher and drifter alike huddled over their bowls, speaking in hushed tones about the violence of the weather. "Saw the Hendricks wagon overturned about 2 miles out," one man reported. "Helped right it, but they were heading back to town quick as they could." "Anyone hurt, mister?" Briggs asked. "The little one, their girl, got thrown clear. Seemed shook up but walking." Claire was refilling coffee cups when she heard it. A crash from outside, followed by shouting. Through the window, she could barely make out shapes in the swirling snow. A wagon, tilted at a dangerous angle, figures struggling. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and plunged into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical force, driving snow into her face with stinging fury. She pushed forward, following the sounds of distress. The wagon had slid into the ditch beside the main street, one wheel completely off the ground. A woman was screaming, a man shouting, and somewhere a child was crying. Claire waded through the drift to find Samuel Hendricks trying to leverage the wagon upright while his wife clutched their daughter, a girl of maybe 6 or 7, her face white with cold and fear. "Let me help," Claire shouted over the wind. Samuel looked up, surprised. "Miss Claire, you shouldn't be—" On 3, she positioned herself beside him, bracing her shoulder against the wagon bed. Her height and strength, for once, were exactly what was needed. Together they heaved. The wagon rocked, teetered, then crashed back onto all 4 wheels. But in that moment of success, Claire heard a crack of splitting wood. The wagon sideboard gave way, and a trunk came sliding out, heading straight for the little girl. Claire moved without thinking. She dove forward, catching the trunk with her body, deflecting it into the snow. Pain shot through her ribs, but the child was safe. "Sarah, Mrs." Hendricks sobbed, clutching her daughter tighter. "Get them inside," Samuel shouted. "I'll deal with the wagon." Claire helped Mrs. Hendricks and Sarah to the way station, half carrying the little girl through the deepening snow. Behind them, she was vaguely aware of other men emerging to help Samuel, but her focus was on getting the woman and child to safety. Inside, she settled them by the stove, wrapping them in the blankets she kept for emergencies. Sarah was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue. Hot coffee for the mother. Claire ordered Tom, who was gaping at the scene, and warm milk with honey for the girl. Now. She knelt beside Sarah, rubbing the child's hands between her own large ones. "You're safe now, sweetheart. Just need to warm up." Sarah looked up at her with wide brown eyes. "You're strong," she whispered, "like my papa." "Sometimes being strong is useful," Claire said softly. "The other ladies say you're too big." Sarah continued with a child's honest, "But you saved me from the trunk. Maybe God made you big so you could save people." Claire's throat tightened. "From the mouths of babes." Mrs. Hendricks was crying quietly. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. If that trunk had hit her." "It didn't," Claire said firmly. "She's safe." The door burst open again, bringing a swirl of snow and more men. Samuel Hendricks, covered in white, followed by several others who'd helped secure the wagon. And behind them, shaking snow from his hat, was Sawyer Hale. His gray eyes found Claire immediately, taking in her soaked dress, her position beside the child, the way she held herself despite what he must have seen, her diving into danger without hesitation. "Saw the whole thing from the livery," Jake Morton was saying loudly. "Big Claire threw herself in front of that trunk like it was nothing. Never seen a woman move like that." "Save the girl," another added. "Sure as shooting." Claire stood, suddenly self-conscious. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her frame. Her hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in wet strands around her face. She knew how she must look, more than ever like some kind of circus oddity. "I'll get more coffee," she mumbled, starting for the kitchen. "Claire!" Sawyer's voice stopped her. He'd never used her name before. She turned. He was standing by the door still, snow melting on his shoulders. Those steady gray eyes held something she couldn't read. "That was brave," he said simply. 2 words again, but different this time. Not about soup or stew, but about her. "Anyone would have—" "No," he interrupted quietly. "They wouldn't." The room had gone silent, everyone watching this unexpected exchange. Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks despite her wet clothes. "I need coffee," she managed, fleeing to the kitchen. She leaned against the wall once she was out of sight, pressing a hand to her ribs where the trunk had struck. Tomorrow there would be bruises, but right now, all she could feel was the warmth of those 2 words. That was brave. When she emerged with fresh coffee, the dining room had reorganized itself. The Hendricks family was seated at a table near the stove. Sarah wrapped in blankets and sipping her warm milk. The men who'd helped were scattered throughout, discussing the storm and its dangers. Sawyer sat in his usual corner, but his attention wasn't on his coffee. He watched as Claire moved through the room, serving and checking on everyone. When she finally approached his table, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit a moment," he said. "I have work." "Sit," gentler this time. "You're favoring your left side." "Caught." Claire sank into the chair. "It's nothing." "Trunk caught you." She nodded reluctantly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small tin. "Salve," Good for bruises. He pushed it across the table to her. My mother made it. Recipe from her mother. Your mother? Somehow she'd never imagined him having a mother, a family, a life beyond these brief encounters. She passed 5 years back, but I remember how to make it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was tall, too. Used to say God made her that way so she could reach the high shelves and knock sense into my father when needed. Claire found herself almost smiling. Sounds like a wise woman. She was. He stood, dropping coins on the table. Take care of those ribs. He was at the door before she found her voice. Sawyer! He turned. Thank you. He touched the brim of his hat and disappeared into the storm. That night, the saloon was quieter than usual, the storm keeping even the most dedicated drinkers at home. But Claire could still hear voices through the wall. You see how Sawyer Hale looked at Big Claire today? Man's got peculiar tastes if he's interested in that. Maybe he just respects what she did, saving the kid and all. Respect ain't the same as want. She'll still die alone. Mark my words. Sawyer Hale's too smart to saddle himself with a woman like that. Claire lay in her bed, the tin of salve cool in her hands. She thought about gray eyes and gentle orders to sit, about a tall mother who reached high shelves and knocked sense into people, about 2 words. That was brave. That somehow meant more than all the criticism she'd ever heard. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but for the first time since arriving in Marrow Pass, Claire didn't feel entirely alone. Somewhere in this wild, harsh place was a man who saw her dive in front of a trunk and called it brave instead of foolish. A man whose mother had been tall and strong and loved. Maybe she would die alone. Maybe the men in the saloon were right, and she was meant for nothing more than dishwater and empty beds. But tonight, with bruised ribs and a tin of homemade salve, Claire allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong. The March wind cut through Claire's shawl like a knife as she stood behind the way station, watching the last stars fade into dawn. Sleep had eluded her again, driven away by the voices that seemed to follow her even into dreams. If she wants a man to need her, she'll have to pay for it, she'd heard someone say last night. That's what Big Martha did over in Carson City, paid a drifter to court her for a month. Course, he ran off with the money and her dignity. The laughter that followed had burrowed under Claire's skin like splinters. She'd lain awake thinking about Big Martha, whoever she was, and the desperation that would drive a woman to such lengths. Was that her future? Would loneliness eventually hollow her out until she'd trade anything, money, pride, self-respect, just to feel wanted for a while? You're up early. Claire spun around. Sawyer stood at the corner of the building, his horse's reins loose in his hand. In the pre-dawn light, she couldn't read his expression. Couldn't sleep, she admitted, pulling her shawl tighter. You're leaving early, too. A tracking job. Man lost some cattle. Thinks they wandered into the Canyonlands. He paused, studying her face. You all right? The question surprised her. When did anyone ask if she was all right? I'm fine. Liar. The word was soft, without accusation. Claire found herself almost smiling despite everything. I should get to the kitchen, she said. Morning bread won't make itself. Claire, her name again, stopping her retreat. Whatever they're saying, whatever poison they're spreading, don't let it in. She turned back, surprised. You heard? Walls are thin. His jaw tightened. Men with small lives make themselves feel bigger by making others feel small. Don't give them that power. Before she could respond, he'd mounted his horse and was gone, disappearing into the pale dawn like smoke. Claire stood there a moment longer, his words echoing in the quiet. Then she squared her shoulders and went inside to start the bread. The day passed like so many others, cooking, serving, cleaning. But something was building in her chest, a pressure that grew with each overheard comment, each sidelong glance, each snickering whisper. By evening, she felt like a pot about to boil over. It was near closing time when Jake Morton and his cronies started up again. They'd been drinking since noon, their voices growing louder and cruder with each round. "I still say Big Claire's gonna crack soon," Jake announced. "Woman needs a man's touch, and she knows ain't nobody gonna give it freely, not to something built like a barn door." "Maybe she'll proposition someone," another suggested. "Offer to cook for free if they'll warm her bed." "Who'd take that deal, have to close your eyes and pretend she's someone else?" Claire's hand stilled on the dishwater. The pressure in her chest had reached a breaking point. She dried her hands slowly, removed her apron, and walked out the back door into the cold night. She didn't think about where she was going. Her feet carried her automatically, past the last buildings of town, up the slight rise where she'd seen campfire smoke earlier. Sawyer often camped there when he wasn't on a job, preferring the open sky to the boarding houses in town. She found him exactly where she'd expected, sitting by a small fire with coffee brewing. He looked up at her approach, and something in her face must have shown her state of mind because he immediately stood. "Claire." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, raw and desperate. I can't keep pretending it doesn't hurt. They talk about me like I'm not even human, like I'm some kind of—" She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back tears that threatened to fall. "I know what I am. I know what I look like. But I'm still a woman. I still feel things. I still want—" She stopped, horrified at herself. What was she doing standing here in the dark, pouring her heart out to a man who'd shown her nothing more than basic kindness? "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have come." "Sit down. I should go." "Claire, sit." Something in his tone made her obey. She sank onto a log near the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. Sawyer poured coffee into a tin cup and pressed it into her hands. "Drink?" The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth was welcome. They sat in silence for several minutes, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Claire found her voice again. "I heard them talking about women who pay men for companionship." The words tasted like ash. "They think I'll become that desperate. Maybe they're right. Maybe one day the loneliness will be too much and I'll—" She trailed off, staring into the flames. "I just wanted one night, not what they think, just one night where someone held me like I mattered, like I was worth holding. I'd give anything for that, my savings, my pride, anything." She felt him shift beside her, and suddenly her words horrified her. I'm not asking you—" She stood abruptly, coffee sloshing. "I'm sorry. The cold has made me foolish. I'll go." "That's not something you sell." Sawyer's words, quiet but firm, stopped her flight. She turned back, confused. He was standing now too, his face serious in the firelight. "What you're talking about, being held, being valued, that's not something you sell or buy or trade for. It's something you deserve, free and clear, just for being who you are." "But who I am is—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "This—" "I know who you are." He stepped closer, and for the first time, she noticed they were almost eye to eye. "You're the woman who saves children from falling trunks, who works harder than any two men, who makes the best soup in 3 territories, who stands tall even when the world tries to make her small. That's not what men want." "Then they're fools." The simple certainty in his voice undid her. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, and she turned away, ashamed. "I should go." "Stay." "Sawyer." "Stay." Gentler this time. "It's cold. You're upset, and the walk back is dark. Stay by the fire. I'll make more coffee." She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee back to her kitchen, her small room, her safe isolation. But something in his steady presence, his matter-of-fact kindness, made her sink back onto the log. He busied himself with the coffee pot, giving her time to compose herself. When he handed her a fresh cup, their fingers brushed. She waited for him to pull back, but he didn't. My mother used to say that the world tells all kinds of lies about what makes a woman valuable, he said, settling back in his spot. Size, beauty, delicacy, all surface things. But value, real value, comes from inside, from strength and kindness and courage. Your mother sounds wise. She was also stubborn as a mule and tough as boot leather. A small smile played at his lips. My father was a small man, not just in height, but in spirit, always worried what others thought. She loved him anyway, but I think she spent half her marriage trying to build him up to match her strength. Never quite managed it. Claire studied him in the firelight. Is that why you're alone, afraid of ending up like him? Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. Or maybe I've been waiting for someone strong enough not to need building up. The words hung in the air between them like morning mist. Claire's heart beat so loud she was sure he could hear it. I should still go, she said finally, but without conviction. If you want. He reached for a blanket folded near his saddle. Or you could stay warm by the fire a while longer. Your choice. He held out the blanket. After a long moment, Claire took it, wrapping it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather and wood smoke and something uniquely him. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned lower. Claire found herself stealing glances at his profile, the way the shadows played across his weathered features, when she shivered despite the blanket. He added more wood to the fire without comment. Thank you, she said softly. For this, for... She gestured vaguely at the night, the fire, the simple acceptance of her presence. No need for thanks. He looked at her directly, those gray eyes serious. And Claire, you don't need to pay for what you're worth. The right person will know it already. She pulled the blanket tighter, feeling something ease in her chest. Maybe tomorrow the voices would start again. Maybe she'd always be Big Claire, the woman too large for love, the spinster who'd die alone. But tonight, wrapped in a borrowed blanket by a quiet man's fire, she felt seen, not as a curiosity or a joke or an object of pity, but as a woman worth sitting with in the dark. When she finally rose to leave, Sawyer walked her back to town, leading his horse with one hand. At the station's back door, he stopped. Same time tomorrow night, he asked. If you need to talk, or just sit quiet, my fire's always got room. Claire looked up at him, this man who offered friendship without price, company without conditions. I'd like that. He touched his hat brim and melted back into the darkness, leaving Claire standing in her doorway with a blanket that smelled like hope and a heart that felt, for the first time in memory, not quite so alone. The first light of dawn painted the sky pink and gold as Claire stirred awake. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling above her wasn't the water-stained wood of her small room. Then memory flooded back. The fire, the conversation, falling asleep wrapped in Sawyer's blanket while he kept watch. She sat up quickly, embarrassed. She was still fully dressed, still wrapped in the blanket that smelled of leather and campfire smoke. Sawyer sat nearby, tending a small fire, coffee already brewing. Morning, he said without turning around. Coffee's almost ready. I fell asleep. The words came out accusatory, as if he'd done something wrong by letting her rest. You were tired. He poured coffee into 2 cups, handed her one. Sun's barely up. You've got time before the kitchen calls. Claire took the cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth, in the soft morning light. Everything felt different. The desperate woman who'd come to him in the night seemed like someone else. Now she was just Claire, sitting by a campfire with bedraggled hair and sleep-creased clothes. I should go, she said, not moving. Drink your coffee first. They sat in companionable silence as the world woke around them. Birds began their morning chorus. In the distance, a rooster crowed, the everyday sounds of life starting over. I'm sorry, Claire said finally, for last night, for everything I said. Nothing to be sorry for. I threw myself at you like some desperate— You did no such thing. His voice was firm. You were hurting and you needed a friend. That's all. A friend? The word sat strangely. When was the last time she'd had a friend? Still, I shouldn't have— Claire. He turned to look at her fully, those gray eyes serious. Stop apologizing for being human. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Took another sip of coffee instead. I have to go, she said, and this time she meant it. Morning bread. She stood, folding the blanket carefully. When she tried to hand it back, he shook his head. Keep it. Gets cold in that back room. Sawyer. Go on, before Briggs comes looking. She clutched the blanket to her chest, trying to find words for what this meant, his kindness, his steadiness, his simple acceptance. But words had never been her strong suit, so she just nodded and started back toward town. Claire. She turned back. Same time tonight, if you want. Got nowhere else to be. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. All right. The walk back to the station felt both endless and too short. Claire slipped in the back door, stashing the blanket under her narrow bed before tying on her apron. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, stoking the stove, mixing dough, setting coffee to boil. But her mind kept drifting to gray eyes and firelight, to the simple comfort of being seen without judgment. You're humming. Mister, Briggs observed when he came down. Don't think I've heard you hum before. Claire hadn't realized she was doing it. She pressed her lips together, focused on kneading the bread. The morning rush came and went in its usual chaos. Cowboys and travelers, merchants and drifters, all needing food and coffee and a moment's rest before moving on. Claire served them efficiently, but something had shifted. The crude comments and speculative looks didn't cut quite as deep. She had a blanket that smelled like campfire and a standing invitation to return. Small things, but they felt like armor. It was nearly noon when Mrs. Hutchins swept in with two other town ladies, their skirts rustling with self-importance. They took a table near the window, speaking in voices meant to carry. Did you hear Mrs. Price was saying? Sally Morrison saw Big Claire coming back from the camps this morning. At dawn, still wearing yesterday's dress. No, Mrs. Hutchins pressed a hand to her chest in theatrical shock. You don't think she actually— What else could she have been doing? We all know she's desperate. Probably threw herself at the first man who'd have her. Claire's hand stilled on the plate she was clearing. Heat crawled up her neck, but before the familiar shame could take hold, she remembered Sawyer's words, "Don't give them that power." She straightened her shoulders and walked over to their table. Ladies, what can I get you today? They had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but Mrs. Hutchins recovered quickly. Just tea, if you can manage that without— She waved her hand vaguely. Whatever you were doing last night. Of course. Claire's voice was steady. Though I was just talking with a friend. Nothing as exciting as you seem to imagine. A friend. Mrs. Price's tone suggested she'd never heard anything more ridiculous. Is that what they're calling it now? Yes, Claire said simply. A friend. Someone who treats me with respect and kindness. I understand that might be a foreign concept to some. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Hutchins' face flushed red. Well, I never— No, Claire agreed quietly. You probably haven't. More's the pity. She walked away, leaving them sputtering behind her. Her hands were shaking, but there was a fierce joy in her chest. She'd stood up for herself, for Sawyer, for whatever this fragile new thing was between them. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Claire found herself glancing at the clock more than usual, calculating the hours until evening. It was foolish. She knew. Nothing had really changed. She was still the too-tall spinster, still the subject of gossip and speculation. But now she had somewhere to go where none of that mattered. When evening finally came and the last customer left, Claire changed into a clean dress and grabbed the blanket from under her bed. Mr. Briggs watched her head for the back door with raised eyebrows, but said nothing. The walk to Sawyer's camp felt shorter this time. She found him in the same spot, fire already burning, coffee pot at the ready. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression made her steps falter. "What's wrong?" He stood slowly, his face grave. "Heard about this morning, what the ladies were saying." Claire's stomach dropped. "Oh, I'm sorry. This is my fault. I shouldn't have let you stay." "Stop!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Just stop!" He did, watching her with those steady eyes. "All my life," Claire said. "People have made decisions for me. What I should want, what I should do, what I should be ashamed of. I'm tired of it." She met his gaze squarely. "You didn't let me do anything. I chose to stay. I chose to come back tonight. Those are my choices, and I won't let their poison take them from me." Something shifted in his expression. "You're right. I know I am." She moved closer to the fire, spreading the blanket on the ground. "Now, are we having coffee or not?" A small smile tugged at his lips. "Yes, ma'am." They settled into what was already beginning to feel like routine. Coffee, comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire. After a while, Sawyer spoke. "They're not entirely wrong. You know, about this looking improper. You coming here." Claire's chest tightened. "Are you asking me to stop?" "No." He was quiet for a moment. "But maybe we should make it proper." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn book. "Thought maybe, if you're going to keep coming here, we could read together. Make it clear this is about friendship, companionship. Nothing untoward." Claire took the book with careful hands. Pride and Prejudice was stamped on the worn cover in fading gold letters. "It was my mother's," he said. "She read it to me when I was young. Thought you might like it." Claire traced the letters with one finger, her throat tight. "You want to read together?" "If you'd like, you could read aloud. Or I could, whatever you prefer." She opened the book carefully, seeing the inscription on the first page. "To my dear son, may you find a love as true as Elizabeth and Darcy's. Your loving mother, Margaret Hale." "Your mother was a romantic," she said softly. "She believed in love." He looked at her steadily. "The real kind, the kind that sees past surfaces." Claire's heart was doing that complicated thing again. She cleared her throat. "I'll read first." She began with the famous opening line, her voice uncertain at first but growing stronger. Sawyer listened, feeding the fire occasionally, his attention complete. When her voice grew hoarse, he took the book and continued where she'd left off. His reading voice was different from his speaking voice, smoother, with a rhythm that suggested years of practice. They traded the book back and forth as the night deepened. Sometimes they stopped to discuss a passage or share a thought. Claire found herself laughing at Mr. Collins' pomposity, indignant at Darcy's first proposal, charmed by the gradual understanding between the two main characters. "Elizabeth reminds me of you," Sawyer said during one pause. Claire snorted. "Elizabeth Bennet is beautiful and charming. I'm neither. She's strong, speaks her mind, doesn't let others define her worth." He looked at her across the fire. "That's beautiful to me." The words landed soft as snow, covering everything with a different kind of silence. Claire looked down at the book in her hands, unable to meet his eyes. "It's late," she whispered. "I should go." "Finish the chapter first." She nodded, not trusting her voice. But as she read about Elizabeth reconsidering her prejudices, about Darcy seeing past his pride, Claire felt something fundamental shifting inside her. When the chapter ended, she closed the book carefully and handed it back. "Thank you for this, for—" She gestured helplessly at the fire. The the simple miracle of being treated like she mattered. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she agreed. The walk back felt like floating. Claire pressed the blanket to her face, breathing in the scent of campfire and possibility. In her small room, she lay awake thinking about a worn book and steady gray eyes and a voice reading about love that saw past surfaces. For the first time in her 27 years, Claire Delaney fell asleep believing that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than the narrow definitions others had placed on her. That maybe Big Claire wasn't her whole story. That maybe, in the pages of a book by a fire with a patient man, she was simply Claire, and that was enough. The rumors spread through Marrow Pass like wildfire in dry grass. By the third night of Claire's visits to Sawyer's camp, the whole town seemed to have an opinion about what was happening under cover of darkness. The whispers followed her through the dining room. Crude speculation disguised as concern. "Reading books." Jake Morton scoffed to his companions over breakfast. "That's what she claims they're doing up there, reading books." "Must be some interesting books," another replied with a leer that made Claire's skin crawl. She served their eggs and bacon without comment, keeping her face carefully neutral. Let them talk. She knew the truth. The quiet evenings by the fire, the comfortable silences, the way Sawyer's voice wrapped around Austin's words like wool around cold hands. But the town's judgment was taking its toll in other ways. "I'm afraid we need to discuss your position, Mr. Briggs said that afternoon, not quite meeting her eyes. Claire's hand stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "Sir, the association is concerned about appearances. A woman in your position, carrying on with, well," he cleared his throat. "It reflects poorly on the establishment." "I'm an excellent cook," Claire said quietly. "My work hasn't suffered." "No one's questioning your work, but the wives of our investors," he trailed off, uncomfortable. "Perhaps if you were to discontinue these evening excursions." "I'm not doing anything improper." "I'm sure you believe that." His tone suggested otherwise. "But perception matters in a small town. I'll give you a week to consider your choices. After that," he shrugged, the message clear. Claire returned to her kneading with mechanical precision, her mind racing. She couldn't lose this job. She had nowhere else to go, no money saved for another train ticket, no references from anyone except the man threatening to dismiss her. That evening, she almost didn't go to the camp, but the thought of Sawyer waiting by the fire, book in hand, drew her feet forward despite everything. She found him pacing, his usual calm fractured. "You shouldn't be here," he said as soon as she appeared. Claire stopped short. "What?" "I heard about Briggs, about the ultimatum." His jaw was tight with anger. "This is my fault. I should have known." "Known what? That people would gossip. They've been gossiping about me since the day I arrived." She moved closer to the fire, claiming her usual spot. "Nothing's changed except now I have somewhere I want to be." "You'll lose your position." "Maybe." "Claire, no." She looked up at him, fierce. "Don't you dare tell me to stop coming. Don't you dare make that choice for me." He stopped pacing, studied her face. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met." "Good." Despite everything, a small smile tugged at his lips. He sank down beside her, closer than usual. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." The admission hurt. "I can't afford to lose this job, but I can't." She gestured helplessly between them. "This is the only good thing in my life right now. These evenings, they're—" "I know." His voice was soft. "For me too." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of impossible choices pressing down. Then Sawyer stood abruptly. "Come on." "Where?" "Just trust me." He helped her to her feet, his hand warm and calloused in hers. Instead of releasing her hand, he kept it, leading her away from the camp and up a narrow trail she hadn't noticed before. "Sawyer, where—" "Almost there." The trail opened onto a small plateau overlooking the valley. In the darkness, the lights of Marrow Pass twinkled below like fallen stars. Above, the real stars stretched endless and bright, unmarred by cloud or smoke. My mother used to bring me here, Sawyer said quietly. When the town got too small, too mean, she'd say, "Look at all that sky, all those stars. We're just specks. Really, their opinions, their judgments. In the face of all this vastness, what do they matter?" Claire's throat tightened. "She sounds wonderful." "She was..." He was still holding her hand. "She would have liked you. A too-tall spinster with no prospects. A strong woman who doesn't let others define her worth." He turned to face her fully. "Claire, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "All right. I've been offered a job, managing a ranch up north, near the mountains. Good pay. Housing included. I've been thinking about taking it." The words hit like cold water. "Oh. I've been thinking about it for months," he continued. "But I kept finding reasons to stay. A tracking job here, a cattle drive there." His thumb moved across her knuckles. "Then you stepped off that train." "Sawyer, let me finish." He took a breath. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But these past weeks, sitting by that fire with you, it's the first time in years I haven't felt alone. And I know that's not enough. Know you deserve more than a broken-down cowboy with calloused hands and too many silences, but..." "Stop!" Claire pulled her hand free, stepped back. "Just stop." His face shuddered. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have..." "You shouldn't assume you know what I deserve." Her voice shook. "All my life, people have told me what I deserve. A spinster's life. An empty bed, loneliness and mockery and..." She pressed her hands to her face. "You're the first person who's ever just seen me. Talked to me like I was worth talking to. Read to me like my opinions mattered. And now you're telling me you're leaving. Come with me." The words hung in the air between them like suspended stars. Claire lowered her hands, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Come with me." He stepped closer. Urgent now. "The ranch needs a cook, a real cook, not just someone who can burn beans. The pay's fair, and there's a cabin..." He stopped, seemed to realize what he was implying. "2 cabins, separate. I wouldn't presume." "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He reached out, hesitant, and when she didn't pull away, took her hands again. "I know it's sudden. Know we've only known each other a short while. But Claire, I also know I don't want to ride north without you. Don't want to sit by another fire with another book and pretend I'm not wishing you were there to argue about Elizabeth Bennet's choices." Claire's mind spun. Leave Marrow Pass. Leave the relative security of her position for the uncertainty of a ranch in the mountains with a man she'd known for mere weeks. "This is madness," she whispered. "Maybe." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "Or maybe it's the sanest thing either of us has ever done. People will talk. They'll say I'm..." She couldn't finish the thought. "Let them talk." His voice was fierce. "They're talking already. Aren't they poisoning something good with their small minds and smaller hearts? At least at the ranch, we'd be away from their poison. I need to think." "Of course." He released her hands reluctantly. "The offer stands. Whatever you decide. Job leaves in a week." A week. The same deadline Briggs had given her. They walked back to the camp in silence, the weight of possibility and impossibility heavy between them. At the fire, Sawyer picked up the book, found their place. But neither of them could focus on Elizabeth and Darcy's romance when their own undefined connection hung in the balance. "I should go," Claire said finally. "Claire." He caught her arm gently as she stood. "Whatever you decide, these weeks have meant everything to me. I need you to know that." She looked down at his hand on her arm, weather-worn and gentle. "To me, too." The walk back to town felt endless. Claire's mind churned with possibilities, fears, hopes she'd thought long dead, a job in the mountains, a cabin of her own, miles from the gossip and judgment that had followed her all her life. And Sawyer. What was he offering? Really employment, friendship, something more. In her small room, she sat on the narrow bed and tried to think practically. She had no savings to fall back on if this ranch position didn't work out. No references except from an employer about to dismiss her anyway. No family to return to. No safety net except her own 2 hands and stubborn will. But she also had no future in Marrow Pass, even if she gave up her evenings with Sawyer. The damage was done. She'd always be the desperate spinster who'd thrown herself at a cowboy. The story would follow her, grow in the telling, until even her excellent cooking couldn't overcome it. At least at a mountain ranch, she'd be, what, not respected? Maybe, but perhaps left alone. Perhaps allowed to just work and exist without the constant weight of others' expectations. And Sawyer would be there. Quiet, steady Sawyer with his books and his patient silences and his way of looking at her like she was exactly the right size, the right shape, the right everything. Claire lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. In a week, she'd have to choose. Security and misery in Marrow Pass, or uncertainty and possibility in the mountains. For a woman who'd been told her whole life that she deserved nothing, the idea that she might deserve a choice, might deserve to reach for something better, felt like the most radical thought she'd ever had. Outside her window, a train whistle sounded in the distance, coming or going, bringing strangers or taking them away. In a week, she might be on such a train again, but this time, she wouldn't be running from something. She'd be running toward it. The wagon lurched over another rut, and Claire braced herself against the wooden seat. 3 days of travel had brought them deep into mountain country, where pine trees rose like cathedral spires and the air tasted thin and clean. Beside her, Sawyer handled the reins with quiet competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. "That's Castle Rock," he said, indicating a towering formation ahead. "Means we're close. Maybe another hour." Claire nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. The decision to leave Marrow Pass had come easier than expected once she'd made it. Briggs had seemed almost relieved when she gave notice, paying her final wages without comment. The town ladies had whispered behind their fans, but Claire had walked past them with her head high, carpetbag in hand. Now, jolting along this mountain road toward an uncertain future, she wondered if she'd lost her mind. "You're quiet," Sawyer observed. "Thinking second thoughts." She glanced at him. "Third and fourth thoughts, more like—" A smile tugged at his lips. "That's fair. It's a big change." "Everything's a big change." She gestured at the wilderness around them. "I've never lived anywhere but towns. Never cooked for less than 20 people at a time. Never." She stopped, unsure how to voice her biggest fear. "Never what?" "Never lived where people didn't know my story before I walked in the door." The admission came out small. What if the ranch hands are just like everyone else? What if? "They're good people." His voice was firm. "Mr. Holcomb, who owns the place. His wife, Sarah. Their son, Tom, who helps run things. The hands are mostly older men. Settled, not the type to gossip or speculate. And they know about me, about us. They know I'm bringing a cook, a friend." He glanced at her. "Whatever else we are or might be, that's between us." The words warmed her more than the afternoon sun. Whatever else we are or might be. The possibility in that phrase made her dizzy. The road curved, and suddenly the ranch spread before them. It wasn't grand, a main house of hewn logs, a barn, several outbuildings, and 2 small cabins set apart from the rest. Cattle dotted the pastures, and chickens scratched in the yard. Smoke rose from the main house chimney. "Home," Sawyer said quietly. As they pulled up to the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch. Sarah Holcomb was small and round, with graying hair and a face lined by sun and laughter. Her eyes were kind as she took in Claire's travel-worn appearance. "You must be Miss Delaney," she called. "Welcome, I've got coffee on and fresh bread if you're hungry." "Thank you, ma'am." Claire climbed down from the wagon, aware of how she towered over the older woman. But Sarah just smiled wider. "Lord, it'll be nice having another woman around who can reach the high shelves. Come on in, both of you. Let's get you settled." The kitchen of the main house was large and well-appointed, with a massive iron stove and plenty of workspace. Claire felt her anxiety ease slightly as she took in the familiar tools of her trade. "You'll cook breakfast and supper for the hands," Sarah explained, pouring coffee. "I handle lunch since the men are usually out on the range. Maybe 15 men total, sometimes 20 during busy seasons. Nothing like what Sawyer says you managed in town." "I can handle it," Claire assured her. "I don't doubt it. Your cabin's the one with the blue door. Sawyer can show you after coffee. Has its own little kitchen for your personal use, though you're welcome to take meals with us any time." Mr. Holcomb appeared then, a tall man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He shook Claire's hand firmly, seeming unbothered by her height or broad shoulders. "Glad to have you," he said simply. "Good cook's worth their weight in gold out here." After coffee and Sarah's excellent bread, Sawyer helped Claire carry her few belongings to the cabin. It was small but clean, with a main room, tiny kitchen, and separate bedroom. Real glass windows looked out on the mountains. And someone had placed fresh wildflowers on the table. "Sarah's touch," Sawyer said, noting Claire's surprise at the flowers. Claire set down her carpet bag, turned in a slow circle. "It's perfect." "Your stove's already stocked with wood. Water pumps out back. Outhouse is—" "Sawyer," she faced him. "Thank you for this, for everything." He ducked his head, suddenly shy. "My cabin's the one with the red door, if you need anything." "I know." They stood there awkwardly, the unspoken everything hanging between them. Then Sawyer cleared his throat. "Supper's at 6. I'll come by. Walk you over for introductions." After he left, Claire unpacked her few possessions, her spare dresses, her mother's Bible, the blanket that still smelled faintly of campfire. She placed them carefully in the small wardrobe, then sat on the bed, a real bed with a proper mattress, not a narrow cot. For the first time in months, she was truly alone with her thoughts. No thin walls with gossip seeping through, no constant awareness of being watched, judged, found wanting. Just silence and mountain air and possibility. She must have dozed, because a knock startled her awake. The sun had shifted, painting long shadows across the floor. "It's time." Sawyer called through the door. Claire smoothed her dress, pinned up her hair, and stepped out to face her new life. The ranch hands were gathered in a long, low building that served as their dining hall. Conversation died as Claire entered, 15 pairs of eyes turning her way. She fought the urge to shrink, standing straight despite the familiar scrutiny. "Boys," Mr. Holcomb said. "This is Miss Delaney, our new cook. I expect you to treat her with respect." "Ma'am," several voices murmured, hats coming off. An older man with a silver in his beard stepped forward. "Name's Cookie. I've been handling the cooking, but I'll be honest, I'm better with horses than biscuits." "Glad to hand over the spatula." A few chuckles broke the tension. Claire found herself almost smiling. "I'll do my best to improve on your biscuits, Mr. Cookie." "Just Cookie's fine, and if you can make something besides beans and bacon, you'll be a hero in my book." The introductions continued. Roy, Jesse, Frank, others whose names Claire tried to memorize. They were weathered men, focused more on their empty bellies than her appearance. When she served the simple stew and cornbread she'd prepared, the appreciative groans were genuine. "This is fine eating," Jesse declared, already reaching for seconds. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "Iowa, mostly, then a way station in Marrow Pass." "Well, Marrow Pass's loss is our gain." The talk turned to ranch business, cattle prices, the weather. Claire moved between the tables, refilling bowls and coffee cups, slowly relaxing. These men looked at her directly, spoke to her like a person, not a curiosity. When Roy asked if she could make apple pie and she said yes, he actually whooped with joy. After supper, as the hands dispersed, Sawyer lingered. Walk. They strolled along a path behind the cabins, the setting sun painting the mountains gold and rose. Neither spoke for a while, comfortable in shared silence. They liked you, Sawyer said finally. They liked my cooking. That too. He stopped walking, turned to face her. Claire, I need to ask, are you happy with this, with your choice? She thought about it, really considered. The work would be hard, the isolation might grow heavy, and whatever was building between them remained undefined, fragile as spring ice. But she thought too of the clean mountain air, the respect in the men's voices, the cabin with real windows and wildflowers on the table, the way Sawyer looked at her like she was exactly right, just as she was. Yes, she said simply, I'm happy. Relief crossed his features. Good, that's good. They resumed walking, shoulders almost touching. As they passed Sawyer's cabin, Claire noticed something. You have a rocking chair. Made it last winter. Gets cold up here, nice to sit by the fire. He paused. You're welcome to use it. Anytime. I mean, if you want to read together sometimes. Like before. I'd like that. His smile transformed his weather-worn face. Tomorrow night after supper. Tomorrow night. At her cabin door. He hesitated. Claire, I'm glad you're here. Whatever happens, whatever this is, I'm glad. She reached out, touched his hand briefly. Me too. Inside her cabin, Claire lit the lamp and looked around her new home. Tomorrow she'd cook for ranch hands who called her ma'am without mockery. Tomorrow night she'd sit in a rocking chair by Sawyer's fire, reading about Elizabeth Bennet finding her way to unexpected happiness. But tonight, she stood at her window watching the stars emerge over the mountains. And for the first time in her 27 years, Claire Delaney felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The girl from Iowa who'd been too tall, too strong, too everything wrong had found her way to a place where she might just be everything right. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no promises, no declarations, no guarantee that Sawyer's feelings matched her own growing attachment. But there were wildflowers on her table and respect in men's voices and a rocking chair waiting by a fire. For a woman who'd been told she'd die alone with nothing but dishwater and empty dreams, it felt like more than enough. It felt like the beginning of everything. The sound of horses approaching pulled Claire from her morning bread-making. Through the kitchen window of the main house, she could see 3 riders coming up the trail, their mounts lathered with sweat from hard riding. She didn't recognize them, but something in their bearing made her uneasy. Sarah Holcomb appeared at her elbow, frowning. That's Will Garrett and his boys. They have a spread about 10 miles south. Not the friendliest neighbors. The men dismounted with the casual arrogance of those used to taking up space. Claire noticed how the ranch hands in the yard seemed to tense, work slowing as they watched the newcomers. Holcomb around, the lead rider called out. Will Garrett was a big man with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. In the barn, Roy answered curtly. Claire returned to her bread, but she could hear voices through the open window. Mr. Holcomb's measured tones, Garrett's louder, more aggressive ones, something about water rights and boundary lines. They've been pushing at our borders for months, Sarah said quietly. Want to buy us out, but John won't sell. The kitchen door opened, and Sawyer entered, his face tight. Mrs. Holcomb, might be best if you and Claire stayed inside for a bit. Trouble? Sarah asked. Nothing we can't handle. But his hand rested on his gun belt, and Claire noticed other ranch hands taking similar stances. Through the window, Claire watched the confrontation escalate. Garrett was gesturing broadly, his voice carrying, "Ain't natural, Holcomb. You holding all this prime land. Man ought to know when he's beat." "I'm not beat, and I'm not selling." "Mister," Holcomb's voice was steady. "Now, I'll ask you polite to get off my property." Garrett laughed, ugly and sharp. "Polite, you hear that? Boys, he's asking polite." His gaze swept the yard, paused. Well, what have we here?" Claire's stomach dropped as she realized he was looking directly at her through the window. "That your new cook? Holcomb heard you brought in some woman." Garrett moved closer to the house, his companions flanking him. "Why don't you come out, sweetheart? Let us get a look at you." "Stay inside," Sawyer said sharply, but Claire was already moving. She'd spent too many years hiding from men like this, letting their words and leers drive her into corners. Not here, not in this place that was beginning to feel like home. Claire stepped onto the porch, back straight, chin high. Sarah made a small sound of protest, but didn't try to stop her. Garrett's eyes widened slightly as he took in her full height, the breadth of her shoulders. Then his smile grew nastier. "Lord Almighty, that's a lot of woman. Where'd you find this one?" "Holcomb pull her off a plow." His men snickered. Claire felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but she held her ground. "I'm the cook," she said evenly. "Is there something you need, Mr. Garrett? Will Garrett?" He moved closer, and Claire could smell whiskey on him despite the early hour. "And what I need, darling, is to understand why a woman built like you is wasting time in a kitchen when you could be—" "That's enough!" Sawyer's voice cut through like a blade. He'd positioned himself between Claire and Garrett, hand resting casual-like on his gun. "The lady asked if you needed something. Answer or move on." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "Well now, Sawyer Hale, should have known you'd be sniffing around. This your woman?" "I'm no one's woman," Claire said before Sawyer could answer. "I work here. That's all." "That's so—" Garrett's smile was predatory. "Well then, maybe you'd like to consider other employment. I pay better than Holcomb, and I appreciate a woman with substance." One of his men guffawed. "Bet she could wrestle a steer to the ground." "Bet she could do a lot of things." Garrett agreed, his meaning clear. Claire felt Sawyer tense, saw his hand shift on his gun. Around the yard, other ranch hands were moving into position. The air crackled with pending violence. "Mr. Garrett," Claire said, surprising everyone, including herself, with how steady her voice came out. "I've met a lot of men like you. Men who think insulting a woman makes them bigger. But here's what I've learned. A man who needs to make others feel small is already the smallest one in the room." Garrett's face darkened. "You got a mouth on you." "Yes, I do, and I use it to tell the truth. Now, mister, Holcomb asked you to leave. I suggest you do so before these gentlemen help you find your way." For a moment, the tension stretched taut as fence wire. Then Garrett laughed, harsh and mirthless. "This ain't over, Holcomb. You can't hold this land forever. And you," he looked at Claire, "might want to reconsider my offer. When this place goes under, you'll need somewhere to land, though I might not be so generous next time." He turned on his heel, stalked back to his horse. His men followed, one of them calling back, "See you around, big girl." They rode off in a cloud of dust and cruel laughter. Claire stood frozen on the porch, the adrenaline draining away to leave her shaky. "You all right?" Sawyer was beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm fine." That was... He seemed to search for words. "You stood up to him. To all of them." "Someone had to..." But her voice trembled now. Sarah emerged from the house, put a gentle hand on Claire's arm. "That was brave. Dear, foolish maybe, but brave." "They'll be back, mister," Holcomb said grimly. "Garrett doesn't give up easy." Neither do we. Sawyer said. His gray eyes found Claire's. Neither do we. The rest of the day passed intense watchfulness. Extra men rode the boundary lines. Guns were cleaned and loaded. Claire threw herself into cooking, trying to forget Garrett's leering face, the way his men had laughed. But that evening, when she walked to Sawyer's cabin for their reading time, she found she couldn't concentrate on the words. Her hands shook as she held the book. "Here," Sawyer gently took it from her. "Let me." He read while she rocked, the familiar rhythm of his voice slowly unknotting her muscles. But when he reached for her hand during a pause, she pulled away. "Don't." He stilled. "Claire, they were right. Weren't they, Garrett and his men? I am a spectacle, a joke. Even standing up to them, what did it accomplish except give them more to mock?" The words tumbled out. Bitter. Big woman with a big mouth, thinking she's worth defending. "Stop." Sawyer set the book aside, knelt in front of her chair so they were eye level. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly. "You faced down 3 armed men who've been terrorizing this valley for months. You didn't back down, didn't hide, didn't let them make you small. You know what that was magnificent." "Magnificent," she laughed, harsh. "Is that what you call a woman built like a plow horse?" "I call you magnificent because you are." His hands found hers, held tight when she tried to pull away. "Claire, I need you to hear this. Really hear it. You're not too big. You're not wrong. You're exactly as you should be. Strong and brave and stubborn as a mule when you need to be." "Sawyer." "I'm not finished." His gray eyes were fierce. "Those men, Garrett and his like, they see your strength and it scares them. So they try to make it something shameful, but it's not. God, Claire, don't you see your strength is beautiful? You're beautiful." The words hung in the air between them. Claire's vision blurred. "You don't mean that." "I do." He raised one hand to her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I mean every word, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it." "Why?" The word came out cracked. "Why do you care what I believe?" For a moment, she thought he might finally say the words that had been building between them for weeks. But instead, he just squeezed her hands gently. "Because you deserve to see yourself the way I see you. The way Cookie sees you when you make his favorite stew. The way Sarah sees you when you help with the heavy work without being asked. The way those ranch hands see you when you stand up to bullies." He paused. "The way I've seen you since that first bowl of soup in Marrow Pass." Claire closed her eyes, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to believe that." "Then let me believe it for you. Until you can." She opened her eyes to find him still kneeling there, patient and steady as always. This man who read to her and made her rocking chairs and looked at men like Garrett with quiet fury when they dared insult her. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Garrett and his men, they'll make trouble." "Let them come." Sawyer's jaw set. "They'll find this ranch isn't as easy to push around as they think, and they'll find you've got more people standing with you than against you." "I'm not your responsibility to protect." "No," he agreed. "You're not. You're my choice to stand beside. There's a difference." The words broke something open in Claire's chest. She freed one hand, touched his face the way he'd touched hers, tentative, wondering. "Read to me some more," she asked softly. "I want to know if Elizabeth tells Darcy yes." He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his weathered features. "I think you already know she does." "Tell me anyway." So he did, reading about love that overcame pride and prejudice and every obstacle society threw in its path. And Claire rocked in the chair he'd made, in the cabin he'd opened to her, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where and who she was meant to be. When it grew late and she rose to leave, Sawyer walked her back as always. At her door, he paused. "Claire, what you did today, standing up to Garrett, I was proud to stand with you." She thought of all the times she'd stood alone, at dances, at church socials, in kitchens and dining rooms where her very presence was a joke. Then she thought of today. Sawyer stepping between her and danger without hesitation, the ranch hands moving to support them both. "I'm not used to having anyone stand with me," she admitted. "Get used to it." He touched his hat brim, started to leave, then turned back. "And Claire, you're not built like a plow horse. You're built like a woman who can weather any storm. That's beautiful to anyone with eyes to see." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her standing in her doorway with tears on her cheeks and something that felt dangerously like hope blooming in her chest. Tomorrow, Garrett might return with more men and crueler words. Tomorrow, the world might remember all the reasons why women like her didn't deserve love or happiness or gentle hands holding theirs. But tonight, Claire Delaney stood in the doorway of her mountain cabin and let herself believe that somewhere between Iowa and here, between lonely and found, she'd discovered something worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, someone worth fighting beside. 3 months had passed since Claire's arrival at the ranch, and the rhythms of mountain life had become as natural as breathing. She rose before dawn to start bread, served hearty breakfasts to appreciative ranch hands, and spent her evenings by Sawyer's fire, reading or simply sitting in companionable silence. The cabin with the blue door had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. It was a crisp October morning when everything began to change. "Letter came for you," Sarah Holcomb said, handing Claire an envelope with her name written in unfamiliar script. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Who would write to her here? She'd left no forwarding address in Marrow Pass, had no family remaining in Iowa. The letter was from a lawyer in Denver. Her great-aunt Millicent, whom Claire had met exactly once as a child, had passed away and left her only niece a sum of $500 and the contents of my sewing room, in hope she might make better use of them than I did in my spinster years. $500. It might as well have been $5,000 for all Claire could comprehend it. She'd never had more than $20 to her name at any time. "Good news?" Sarah asked gently, noting Claire's shocked expression. "My aunt died, left me some money and—" Claire reread the letter. "Her sewing things, I barely knew her." "Family's family," Sarah said. "Even the distant kind. Will you need to travel to Denver to collect—" The thought of leaving the ranch, even briefly, made Claire's chest tight. But $500, that was freedom, security, enough to go anywhere, be anyone. "I suppose I must," she said faintly. That evening, she told Sawyer about the letter as they sat by his fire. He listened quietly, that stillness she'd come to recognize as his way of processing important things. "When will you leave?" he asked finally. "Mr. Holcomb said he could spare Roy to drive me to the train station tomorrow. I should only be gone a week." "A week?" He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "That's good. Not too long." But something in his voice made her look at him sharply. "Sawyer, what's wrong?" $500 is a lot of money. Enough to start fresh somewhere bigger than a mountain ranch. Understanding dawned. "You think I won't come back? Would anyone blame you if you didn't?" He still wouldn't look at her. "You could go to San Francisco, Denver, anywhere. Open your own restaurant, maybe. Find a place where people see a successful businesswoman instead of what? Instead of a too-tall spinster cooking for ranch hands in the middle of nowhere." Claire set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. "Is that what you think I am?" "It's what you called yourself when you arrived." That was before. She stopped, frustrated. Before what? Before evenings by the fire, before his quiet presence became as necessary as breathing, before she'd started thinking dangerous thoughts about what it might mean to be chosen. "Before what?" he prompted softly. "Before I found a place where my height was useful for reaching high shelves in the kitchen. Before Cookie started calling me the miracle worker for making something besides beans. Before Sarah asked my opinion on things that matter. Before I had a home." She paused, heart hammering. Before you, he looked at her then, gray eyes intense in the firelight. Claire, I'm coming back, she said firmly. The money is wonderful, yes, but it doesn't change anything. This is my home now. You say that now, but when you're in the city, with choices you didn't have before. Claire stood abruptly. Do you want me to go? Is that what this is about? No. He was on his feet too, the most agitated she'd ever seen him. God, Claire, I want you to stay so badly it scares me, but I can't be the reason you limit yourself. You deserve more than... Then what then you? Her voice cracked. You still don't understand, do you? Everyone my whole life told me what I deserved. Loneliness, mockery, settling for scraps of affection. You're the only person who ever told me I deserved to be valued. And now you're telling me I deserve better than the one place where I found that... Claire, no. She grabbed her shawl. I'm going to Denver. I'm going to collect my inheritance. And then I'm coming home. To my cabin and my kitchen and my evening readings with a stubborn man who can't see what's right in front of him. She was at the door when he caught her arm. Wait! She turned, ready to argue more, but the look on his face stopped her. Raw, vulnerable, desperate. I need you to come back, he said roughly. God help me. Claire, these months with you have been the best of my life. Every morning I wake up knowing you're just across the way. Every evening sitting here with you feels like a gift I don't deserve. And I'm terrified that once you have choices, real choices, you'll realize you're settling for a broken-down cowboy who can barely string words together when it matters most. Claire's anger evaporated. She reached up, touched his face gently. You're not broken, and you string words together just fine when you're reading to me. He leaned into her touch. Promise me, promise you'll come back. I promise. She stood on her toes, pressed a kiss to his cheek, the first kiss she'd ever initiated in her life. I'll be back in a week. Try not to burn the ranch down while I'm gone. The next morning, as Roy drove her to the train station, Claire clutched her carpet bag and tried not to think about the look on Sawyer's face when she'd left. He'd been waiting by the wagon, had helped her up without a word, but his hand had lingered on hers, and he'd watched until they were out of sight. Denver was overwhelming after months in the mountains. The noise, the crowds, the sheer press of humanity made Claire long for pine-scented air and silence. The lawyer's office was efficiently impersonal, the inheritance transferred without fuss. Her aunt's sewing supplies filled 2 large trunks, beautiful fabrics, a new singer machine, threads and notions of every description. Your aunt was quite the seamstress, the lawyer informed her. Apparently, she made gowns for some of Denver's finest ladies, though she never married herself. Claire thought of another spinster, sewing beautiful clothes for other women to wear to dances she'd never attend. But Aunt Millicent had built something of her own, had left a legacy beyond anyone's expectations. With her business concluded. Claire had 2 days before the return train. She wandered the city, window shopping with money in her pocket for the first time. A dress shop caught her eye. Mannequins displaying the latest fashions from back east. On impulse, she went inside. May I help you? The shopgirl's tone suggested she doubted it. I'd like to see some dresses, ready-made, if you have them in larger sizes. The girl's expression grew pitying. I'm afraid our ready-made selection wouldn't... That is, we could perhaps arrange for custom work. Claire thought of the beautiful fabrics in her aunt's trunks, the new sewing machine. No, thank you. I'll make my own. She left the shop with her head high. But the encounter had stirred old feelings. In the mountains, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be too much for the world's narrow standards. That evening, alone in her hotel room, she counted her money, enough to go anywhere. San Francisco, where a woman might disappear into the crowd. Chicago, where her cooking skills could find grander outlets. Even back east, where no one knew her story. But as she lay in the too-soft bed listening to city sounds, All she could think about was mountain silence and gray eyes reflecting firelight. Sawyer reading about Elizabeth Bennet's courage, Sarah's warm kitchen, Cookie's delighted whoop when she'd made apple pie. Home. When had a ranch in the mountains become more home than anywhere else had ever been? The return journey felt endless. At every stop, Claire fidgeted, eager to be moving again. The trunks of sewing supplies seemed to grow heavier with each mile, but she'd dragged them this far and wouldn't abandon them now. Finally. The train wheezed into the familiar station. Claire nearly fell in her haste to disembark, searching the platform for Roy's familiar figure. But it wasn't Roy waiting with the wagon. Sawyer stood by the horses, hat in his hands, looking as nervous as she'd ever seen him. When he saw her, his whole body seemed to relax. "You came back," he said wonderingly. "I told you I would." "I know, but He cleared his throat. "I spent the whole week thinking of all the reasons you shouldn't, all the better places you could go, better things you could do." "Better than what?" Claire challenged. "Better than cooking for men who appreciate it, better than having friends who value me, better than evenings by the fire with someone who sees me as I am." "Claire!" "Better than being with a man I love." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Sawyer's eyes widened. He swallowed hard. "You love me." "I'm fairly certain I've been in love with you since you said soup's good, and meant it." Despite everything, Claire found herself almost smiling. "The question is what we're going to do about it." Instead of answering, Sawyer crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her, not on the cheek, not gentle or careful, but full on the mouth with a desperation that matched her own. Claire had never been kissed before, but she understood instinctively how to answer, pouring weeks of longing into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sawyer rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too. God help me. Claire, I've loved you since you stood up to Jake Morton in the way station. Maybe before." "Then why?" "Because you deserve better. Because I'm just a cowboy with rough hands and too many silences. Because—" Claire kissed him again, effectively cutting off his litany of reasons. "I've spent my whole life being told what I deserve by people who never bothered to ask what I want. Don't you be one of them." He pulled back to look at her. Really look at her. "What do you want?" "You, the ranch, our evenings by the fire. A life where I'm not too much or too big or too anything except myself." She paused, suddenly uncertain. If that's what you want too." "Come here," he said roughly, pulling her close again. "Feel that." She could feel his heart racing under her palm, matching her own. "Yes, that's what I've felt every day since you arrived. Every time you smiled at something in our book. Every time you stood tall when the world tried to make you small. Every time you looked at me like I might be worth something more than a hired hand who's good with horses. You are worth more, worth everything." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise more than passion. "Marry me." Claire pulled back, stunned. "What?" "I know I should do this proper, ring and kneeling and pretty words. But Claire, I've waited so long already." He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Marry me. Let me wake up every morning knowing you're not just across the way, but beside me. Let me give you my name and my home and whatever future we can build together. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Wholly, proudly, without reservation." Claire thought of the money in her bag. All those choices Sawyer had worried about. She could go anywhere, be anyone. But standing here in a dusty train station with the mountains rising behind them and this good man offering his heart, she knew there was nowhere else she wanted to be. "Yes," she said simply. His smile was like sunrise. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything." This time when he kissed her, it was with joy rather than desperation. Around them, other travelers moved past, some staring at the tall woman and the cowboy, embracing so openly, but Claire didn't care. Let them stare. Let them whisper. She was done trying to be smaller to fit their expectations. "Come on," Sawyer said finally, helping her with her trunks. "Let's go home. Sarah's been cooking all week, convinced you wouldn't come back. She'll be so relieved she'll probably cry." "Just Sarah," Claire teased. He helped her onto the wagon seat, then surprised her by pulling her close again. "I might have gotten some dust in my eyes a few times. Cookie said I was moping. Jessie threatened to lock me in the barn if I didn't stop pacing." Claire laughed, the sound bright in the afternoon air. "My tragic cowboy, how did you survive?" "By believing you'd keep your promise." He clicked to the horses, started them toward home, and by planning. Planning what? "You'll see." As they drove toward the mountains, Claire's hand in his, her inheritance of money and sewing supplies in the back. She thought about the girl who'd fled Iowa, certain she'd die alone. That girl could never have imagined this. A man who saw her strength as beauty, a home where she belonged, a future bright with possibility. But then again, that girl had never tasted mountain air or felt the solid presence of someone who chose her, not despite her size, but because of everything she was. The ranch appeared around a bend, smoke rising from chimneys, cattle lowing in the distance. Home, their home. And somewhere in the kitchen, Sarah was cooking too much food. Cookie was probably complaining about something. The hands would gather for supper, grateful for her return. And tonight, Claire would sit in a rocking chair by Sawyer's fire. But this time as his intended. This time with the promise of all the nights to come. Reading together. Building a life together. Proving wrong everyone who'd said she'd never know love. Claire Delaney. Too tall, too strong. Too much of everything had found her place. And it was exactly the right size. The small church in the valley had never seen a wedding quite like this one. It was a modest building. Whitewashed boards and simple wooden pews. But Sarah Holcomb and the ranch wives had transformed it with wildflowers and pine boughs until it looked like something from a fairy tale. Claire stood in the tiny back room, smoothing the ivory dress she'd made from her aunt's finest silk. It wasn't fashionable by city standards. She'd adapted the pattern to suit her height and frame, creating something that flowed rather than constrained. The color set off her sun-bronzed skin, and Sarah had woven tiny white flowers into her hair. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "Just beautiful." "I look like myself," Claire said softly, "just in a nicer dress." "Exactly." Sarah squeezed her hands. "That's what makes you beautiful." Through the thin walls, Claire could hear the congregation gathering. Word had spread through the valley about the wedding, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness the union of Sawyer Hale and the woman who'd stood up to Will Garrett. "Ready?" Cookie appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his one good suit. He'd offered to walk her down the aisle since she had no family present. "Sawyer's about to wear a hole in the floor up there. Never seen a man so nervous." Claire took his offered arm. "Let's not keep him waiting." The small organ wheezed to life, playing a hymn that echoed off the rafters. Cookie led her to the church doors, then paused. "Claire," he said gruffly, "want you to know we're all proud to know you. Don't care what anyone says about anything. You're good people." Her throat tight, Claire could only nod. The doors opened, and she stepped into the church. Every pew was full, faces turning to watch her progress. She saw the ranch hands, scrubbed clean and grinning, the neighboring families who'd become friends, even some faces from town, drawn by curiosity or genuine well-wishes. But Claire had eyes only for the man waiting at the altar. Sawyer stood tall in his black suit, a suit she'd never seen him wear. His gray eyes were bright with emotion as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he held out his hand, and she took it without hesitation. "You came," he whispered, for her ears alone. "Where else would I be?" Pastor Morrison, a circuit preacher who covered 3 valleys, began the ceremony with words about love and commitment, about building a life together in both sunshine and storm. Claire barely heard him, lost in Sawyer's steady gaze, in the warm grip of his hands. "Do you, Sawyer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do, clear and certain, no hesitation." "Do you, Claire, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words she'd never thought she'd say, now feeling as natural as breathing. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Sawyer cupped her face gently, mindful of their audience, but the kiss he gave her was thorough, a promise and a claim all at once. When they parted, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up under the summer sky. Claire had cooked for days beforehand with Sarah's help, and the spread rivaled anything from her waystation days. There was dancing on a floor of wooden planks laid over the grass, fiddle music carrying across the valley. "Dance with me," Sawyer said, holding out his hand. "I don't really know how," Claire admitted. All those years of standing against walls at social gatherings had left her with little practice. "Neither do I. We'll learn together." He led her onto the floor, and, miracle of miracles, they fit. Her height matched his. No awkward stooping or stretching. They moved together, sometimes stepping on each other's feet, sometimes finding the rhythm, always smiling. "Look at that," she heard Jessie say to Roy. "Perfect match." And they were, Claire realized, not because they were both flawless, but because their imperfections aligned. His silences and her uncertainties, his steady strength and her fierce independence, all of it wove together into something stronger than either alone. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains gold and rose, the guests gradually departed with well wishes and warm embraces. Claire noticed several of the women who'd initially looked askance at her now pressed her hands warmly, welcoming her truly into their community. When the last wagon rolled away, Claire and Sawyer stood together looking at their home. The two cabins that had housed them separately would soon be expanded into one proper house. Sawyer and the hands had already begun the work. "No regrets?" Sawyer asked, arm around her waist. "None." Claire leaned into him. "You—" "Only that it took us so long to get here." They walked together to his cabin, their cabin now, inside. Sawyer had placed wildflowers on the table, and a new quilt covered the bed. The rocking chairs sat by the fireplace, ready for evening readings. "I have something for you," Claire said, suddenly shy. From her trunk, she pulled out a shirt she'd made from her aunt's fabrics, soft blue cotton that would bring out his eyes, sewn with tiny, perfect stitches. Sawyer ran his hands over it reverently. "It's beautiful. No one's ever made me anything before." "Get used to it. I have a lot of fabric and a new sewing machine." He set the shirt carefully aside and drew her close. "And I have something for you." From his pocket, he pulled a small leather journal. "Thought maybe you could write down our story for our children someday, so they'll know how their parents found each other." "Children!" Claire's heart skipped. "If you want, tall daughters who stand up to bullies, quiet sons who know the value of the right words at the right time." He touched her cheek. "Or just us, building a life together. Whatever you want, Claire, whatever makes you happy." "You make me happy," she said simply. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." Later, as they lay together in the quiet cabin, Claire thought about all the voices that had told her she'd never know love. The cruel laughter, the whispered predictions of eternal spinsterhood, the assumptions that her size made her unworthy of desire or devotion. They'd all been wrong. Here in Sawyer's arms, her husband's arms, she was exactly the right size. Here, her strength was appreciated, her height admired, her very presence cherished. She'd traveled so far from that dusty Iowa street, not just in miles, but in understanding of her own worth. "What are you thinking?" Sawyer asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "About how they said I'd die alone with nothing but dirty dishes for company." His arms tightened around her. Fools, every one of them. I used to believe them. Claire admitted. Used to think being alone was my fate. And now, she turned in his arms to face him. Now I think fate is what we make it. And I choose this. You. Us. Our life here in the mountains, where the sky is big enough for dreams. My eloquent wife, he murmured. Maybe you should write our story after all. Maybe I will. The spinster who found love in the mountains. How does that sound? How about the woman who knew her worth? Sawyer suggested. That's the real story, isn't it? You always deserved love. Claire, you just needed to find someone who could see it. And I found you. We found each other. Outside, night settled over the ranch. Somewhere an owl called, and the wind whispered through the pines. In the barn, horses shifted in their stalls, all the familiar sounds of home, made sweeter by sharing them. Claire had set out from Iowa with $27 and a broken heart. Certain she was too much of everything wrong to ever be right for anyone. She'd found work and friendship, challenge and triumph. She'd stood up to bullies and cooked for hungry men and read by firelight with a patient cowboy who saw her truly. And now she lay in the arms of that cowboy, her husband, in a cabin that would soon be expanded into a proper house. In the morning, she'd cook breakfast for the ranch hands who'd become family. She'd work in Sarah's kitchen and plan the garden she wanted to plant. She'd sew shirts for Sawyer and dresses for herself that fit properly and beautifully. She'd live a life that proved them all wrong, all those voices that had tried to make her small. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. And I love you, Sawyer replied. Today, tomorrow, always. Claire smiled, settling deeper into his embrace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, running a household, merging two lives into one. Perhaps eventually children who would need to learn their own worth in a world quick to judge. But tonight, she was simply a woman who'd been told she'd never know love, lying in the arms of the man who'd proven that the only opinion that truly mattered was her own. And her opinion was that Claire Delaney Hale, tall, strong, and exactly the right size, was finally, completely, perfectly home. In the rocking chair by the cold fireplace, the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice lay closed. Its story was complete, and so was theirs. Not ending, but beginning. A new chapter in a life that would be filled with morning coffee and evening conversations, hard work and gentle touches, quiet love and fierce loyalty. Exactly as it should be. Exactly as she deserved. Thank you so much for listening to this heartfelt story. I hope Claire and Sawyer's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about this beautiful tale of love and acceptance. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these wonderful tales from the American frontier. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.